Annie, I took so many notes in what you've just been talking about. Start going right back to what you said about promises and how they don't exist in the commercial one. That's fascinating. And I thought I used to have a partial sort of experience in communications, and of course promises do exist in the advertising industry. They exist in the political spectrum as well. They are not always met, and there is a thing that we used to call the say-do gap, which is you can make a brand promise, but you've got to deliver on your promise as well. And that's really, as you've said, based on understanding the people who are going to who are targeted for the behavioural change. So I think that is, and you came up with the point just after I wrote it down. And of course, psychological safety, therefore, is a part of that understanding, and inclusion, therefore, is a critical part of psychological safety. So I thought that you summed that up so well. In terms of inclusion in the workplace, I know you've done quite a lot of work in the neuroscience area, quite a lot of research in that area. How much do you think neurodiversity is embraced within that inclusive spectrum now, and do you think that more could be done?
I don't think enough attention is being given to it, but I think it is a really, really important area. And some organisations are beginning to give it more thought, but I still think we've got a long way to go yet. And we do need that neurodiversity, and we need diversity in all its shapes and forms and expressions. Certain people do have are predisposed to certain types of work better than others, and isn't it great to be able to tap into all of that resource and magic that those different people can bring. So I think it's something we absolutely need to be embracing far more than we have done today.
Yeah, and I think I saw this in the advertising world, because of course you have the creatives over there who just come up suddenly with a "just do it" or "Red Bull gives you wings," and you don't know where it's come from, but they've just, as in fact, as Steve Jobs used to say, he said, creativity can't be taught. It's different. It's a view that certain people have on the world that other people don't and can't, and they see things that other people don't. So I think that is really important. But I loved also the way you talked between the differentiation between inclusion and diversity. Diversity being a sort of presentational aspect of a company, almost about what it looks like, and inclusion being what it feels like, and as we just talked about, across a huge spectrum of different characteristics. How should companies deal with that separately then? Should they focus on inclusion before diversity? Are the two interlinked? What's your view on that?
So personally, as I said, I think, well, ideally you want both, but I think unless you get the elements of having an inclusive culture in place, your diversity is not going to work. And I think this is why we're having glacial progress on increasing that diversity in the workplace. I know and where I used to work, increasing gender diversity has been painfully slow. Increasing, ethnicity, painfully slow. And it's not because there aren't great people out there. It's because the work environment has not really supported those people and enabled them to flourish. And so, you can continue to invest and spend millions and millions in hiring people of diversity, but if you don't have that inclusive culture, they're not going to stay. And so that's where, for me, it is slightly chicken and egg. I do think you need to make sure you have the building blocks of an inclusive culture before you start really trying to invest and bring more diversity. But it is important to have that diversity in organisations.
There's a professor called Randall Peterson from London Business School who's done a lot of research on this, and this is going back a couple of years now. But a meta-analysis that he conducted on the research around diversity and performance, he presented. And if you imagine diversity on the x-axis, performance on the y-axis, a lot of people think that you get a straight line correlation going up, right? The more diverse, the higher performing the team will be. Well, actually, the line is flat, suggesting that diversity has no impact on average on performance. But when you dig into the data, what it shows is that whilst it's true that higher performing teams will tend to be more diverse, it's not true that more diverse teams will be high performing. There's an incredible spread in terms of the range of performance at the really diverse end, because of exactly the challenge that you've identified. It's difficult to first of all to manage and lead a diverse team, because we just talked about having to expend effort and take time. You can't be lazy. You have to really understand how people think, and that's difficult. And then there's just these clashes that need to be managed when people are more, just have divergent thinking. So unless you do the groundwork and create the conditions for success beforehand, you are running the risk of perhaps having a low performing team and it just falling down, and perhaps attrition, and just a really unpleasant place to be for that one person who perhaps you really need to stay.
It's interesting, actually, because I've also seen research from Harvard which says that you're right. It is slower having diverse teams, but when it comes to the creative thinking bit, that's where you do get better performance. What can then become more problematic is when you're trying to implement, and implementation can often be harder when you've got very diverse teams. So having less homogenous teams when it comes to the implementation can often be better. But this point around inclusion at the moment, I think, is, again, we need to be even more mindful of it when, again, people are working from home. And this is the time of year when it's like performance reviews for a lot of organizations. And I think really being inclusive means really understanding what are the personal circumstances for each individual at the moment working from home. I mean, some people are in a happy situation where they've got, a nice place where they can work. Other people, particularly women, may have, sort of parenting and educating of children to look after. There may be elderly care issues. You might be a young person, in a flat with 6 other people, and the only space you've got is to be, in your bedroom working from your bed. All of that's going to impact performance. And so I think, really thinking much more broadly about what being inclusive is really something that organizations need to do now, and not disproportionately, sort of favoring those people who have been able to get into an office and maybe have had more interaction with senior people than other people who, for various reasons, have had to work from home throughout this whole period. So that inclusive way of looking at things needs to be really broad at the moment.
It's interesting, I think, Annie, because and we try to work on this as much as possible, because inclusion has a massive effect on operational efficiency and effectiveness. Feeling a sense of belief and belonging to an organisation has a massive effect on motivation of people to succeed. We've seen it in the military, but of course, in a very polarised view, we see it in other organisations as well. And I think it is different to diversity. And in fact, a great friend of mine, Paul Modley, who works for Alexander Mann, he wrote an article on LinkedIn and saying you can't do diversity until you do inclusion. And should we therefore make sure that we take inclusion as something that affects operational output, take it from an operational perspective, as a sort of a results or an effects-based analysis, rather than looking at what goes in the front end? Does that make sense to you?
Well, inclusion is, again, it's a bit like your operating system. I mean, the way I distinguish between the two is diversity is a fact. You either have this number of women in your organization, you have this people of different ethnicity in your organization. It's like a fact in a way, that diverse. Whereas inclusion is a way of being, it's a way of thinking, it's the way of, as you say, making people feel that they can belong and be themselves. And so that inclusion has to be part of your whole operating system. Yeah. It needs to be looked at every part and every stage of that operating system. So your pay and performance, the way you promote people, the way you hire people, the way you give people stretch assignments, all of that needs to have an inclusive approach to it. In order for the investment in the factual bit, how many people of different diversity you have are going to be able to work.
Annie, I'd like to pivot slightly and look at some of the work you've done in the neuroscience area, particularly around stress. And I've also seen you write about those gut feelings that we have, and the challenges now that we're kind of working remotely. We're not around people. But on stress, clearly we're going through a stressful time in all aspects of our lives. How do you see stress affecting performance?
So interesting. Let me just tell you about an experiment that was done in the States not long ago, actually. So 30,000 people in the States were interviewed or asked 2 questions every year for a period of 10 years. And they were asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how much stress did they have in their lives? And then the second question was, did they think stress was negatively impacting their health? So they asked these 30,000 people the same question every year for 10 years. And then when the scientists and researchers looked at the results, what they found was, not unsurprisingly, that those people who had the most stress in their life also had the most ill health. So they, sort of mental health, physical issues, and also had a higher mortality rate. But it only applied to those people who also thought that stress was bad for their health. Those people who had the same amount of stress in their lives, but didn't think stress was inimical to their health, actually had the best mental and physical health and the lowest mortality rate. And so what's really interesting about this is that the way we perceive stress has a huge impact on its ability to actually physically impact us. And so knowing that means that we can therefore, if we can change our attitude to stress, means we can change the impact that it has on us. And if you think about it, it's the external thing, not ourselves, that causes the stress in that sense. It's not the external thing, because we all find different things stressful. I mean, some people find presentations massively stressful. Other people get on a stage, find it really easy. I would find bungee jumping really, really stressful. That just does not appeal to me at all. Other people would love that. And people's stress load, we call it the allostatic load, is also very different. Some people can seem to take on huge amounts of stress and sail through it. Other people, it can be one tiny little thing that just kind of seems to set them over the edge. So all our reactions to stress are very, very different. And stress actually is something that actually can help us. I mean, what happens when we get stressed is that the chemical factories in the body, the pituitary gland and the hypothalamus, what they do is they release chemicals that actually help prepare the body for whatever that stressful moment is. So you get neuroadrenaline, you get serotonin, and what they do is they allow the sort of cognitive part of our brain to really fire on all 4 cylinders. So we can take information, we can make decisions more quickly, we're really, really working, our brain is firing up. And the serotonin also basically helps our long-term memory in our hippocampus. So basically the brain in milliseconds is remembering past experiences that you might have been in a similar situation and what worked and what didn't work. And then we also get adrenaline released. And that basically means our eyes open so that we can have better peripheral vision, our heart starts pumping, our blood starts pumping. And so we're really primed to do that fight or flight type of thing that might be required. So we're absolutely at our best when we get some stress. And I find knowing that really helpful. So when I get that heart pounding and that slightly sick feeling in my tummy, rather than me thinking, oh my God, I now think, fantastic, I am now really firing on all 4 cylinders. And I then channel that into whatever it is, that moment of stress or that particular project or whatever. I personally find that quite helpful.
Does that make you a procrastinator, Annie? Are you one of those people that delays things? So you get that tension and that feeling?
I do. I don't have enough stress in my life. So I do actually, for example, I have to let things be very last minute for me because I need to have that in order to perform at my best. So you're right. When it comes to, I'm a deadline person. I need to have literally that in order to really get that.
I guess that's not the same as being a procrastinator, but the fact is that you have to have that deadline in order to feel that.
Yeah.
There is a great TED talk you can look up on the benefits of procrastination, which highlights some of these very points. Actually, it does bring the best out of it. Annie, can I just ask though, because I'm dying to ask this question when you talk about what could be perceived as a learned response to stress, an increased tolerance to stress by experiencing stressful situations. Now, so let's talk about young people in the world at the moment who we traditionally have accused of being slightly risk averse, slightly, the snowflake generation is an awful term, and I have children who are in that generation, but they are less tolerant to stress. I think that's fair to say at the moment. Is there an argument for turning up the stress levels a little bit to increase that tolerance, or is it a stage now where we really need to protect them and turn it down?
So I think it depends. I think it depends on, because as I say, we all have different attitudes to stress. We all have different color hair. We all have different attitudes to stress. So I think understanding that is important, because it won't work for everybody. But resilience, that's what we're really talking about. Resilience can be built a bit like a muscle. If I want to make my bicep builder, I pick up a heavy weight, and what happens is I use that weight, and the muscle fibers start to sort of break down a bit, but that then helps them get stronger, and also my body remembers lifting up that heavy weight. And so next time, when we pick up the heavy weight, we do a little bit more, and that allows me to go a little bit further. And so we build up that muscle, and we build up that resilience in the muscle so that we can actually increase the amount of weight. Stress and resilience is very similar. So we can help build our resilience if we are given challenges that we think are going to be difficult for us to achieve. But if we're given the right support around that, and if we don't meet the challenge, we're not seen as being a failure. We're actually taught, well, what can we learn from this? This is a great learning opportunity. This isn't me being a failure. This is actually me I can learn something from this. Then we can start to build that ability to be able to handle more stress. But it has to be done in a supportive way. And as I say, it has to be that there's no such thing as really failing. It's like, okay, that didn't end up as we expected, but what have we learned from it? And what can we do differently next time? That way you can definitely build up resilience. And you'll find there are some people who have had really kind of like tough upbringings, and their resilience, because they've had lots of challenges in their life, is higher. There are other people who haven't had that, and they don't react to stress so well. There's also a lot of theory about attachment theory and what your child, when you're a baby, can have an impact on stress. And then also your DNA, even your DNA will impact how much stress you can handle. But we can definitely do things to help build that resilience. And so I think with our kids, etc., as I say, finding opportunities to give them challenges and allowing them to fail and to learn in the process, and then the next time they'll be that much stronger again.
It's so tough, isn't it? Especially with young children. We had a friend called Tom Long on the podcast who runs an organization called Taka. It's a preschool, so for very young kids, and they focus on physical activity and learning through physical activity. One of the things they focus on more than most is this resilience factor, and they see kids who haven't gone through any kind of failure at all, and these are young kids, like younger than 5. But I've got 3 kids now, 7, 4, and 2, and seeing them fail is heartbreaking, because it's an emotional roller coaster, isn't it? And they will go from happy to my world is about to end in 5 seconds. But I think you almost have to be, I don't want to call it tough love, because it's so much more. It should be so much more sophisticated than that, but they have to go through this cycle in order to learn where the upper and lower ranges are, and then how to perhaps moderate themselves a little bit more. And yeah, it's okay if I fail. And I love the comment you had on framing, and it's almost like Stoic philosophy now given a scientific edge, right? With this experiment in the US. It is all about the framing, and there are certain things that you just can't control, and often failure is one of those. But if you just focus on what you can control, which is your response, and look at it as a learning experience, you're going to get much better outcome.
Mm. I know for me, I personally do lots of physical challenges, sporting type challenges that I think are going to be really, really tough. And then I take that experience and I bring that back into my work. So that for me is how I've built resilience, definitely by doing physical things. And then I've just always remembered, well, look, I managed to overcome that, or I managed to do that. I'm not going to let this thing in the workplace sort of daunt me. You know what I mean? So I bring those resources that I used there And that for me has been something I found very helpful.
And I wasn't going to mention this, Annie, but you're actually a record holder, right? You part of a dragon boat team that rowed across the channel.
Yeah, we did. There were 19 of us. We paddled a dragon boat across the English Channel to raise money for charity, and we trained for about a year. It was enormous fun. Actually, it was great. But I never thought I'd be able to do that. And you have to put in the the sort of the training in order to be able to do something like that. You can't just get in the boat and suddenly just paddle off for nearly 4 hours. But it was great. I really loved it. Well done.
Annie, where can people connect with you, and can you just tell us what it is you're up to now?
So I've been studying neuroscience, which has been great, and I'm using that a lot now. So I've now got my own consulting business, which is called Cerebellum Partners Limited, and basically, what I'm trying to do, my purpose, I guess, is to humanise the workplace. Help create organisations where people can thrive, not merely survive. So I do that through doing culture transformation, but also through leadership coaching as well, because so much of culture transformation has to come from the top down too. So also working with leaders around that too.
Very good. Well, Annie, thanks again for taking the time to chat with us on Tea and Metals. It's been a fascinating conversation, as I knew it would be. Good luck with the Christmas tree decorations this weekend. Are you a tinsel or bauble person?
I'm definitely more. I don't have any tinsel on my tree. I'm a bauble person.
I think you might have been watching The Crown too much, Reece. That's a throwback to the 80s, definitely.
But I've got to find a fairy or a star to put on the top. I don't have that yet, so I've got to work on that.
Right,
very good.
That in Tesco's during lockdown, Annie. I don't know. Good luck with that.
An essential item.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, lovely to speak to you, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Tea and Metals, and see you next time.